Hello, everyone. Welcome, crazy transformers, and welcome to Level of Crazy YouTube channel, where we dive deep into all topics EI, EQ, healing the division within ourselves and with each other, transforming that reactive crazy into proactive crazy, and optimizing that emotional intelligence. I am your host, Ala Esther Levy, emotional intelligence specialist, minister of spiritual healing, and undercover comedian. And on today's episode, we are talking about how playing the violin can decrease your stress, anxiety, and boost your EQ. Our host today on Zoom is Carl Schmidt. Carl was essentially born into music and began his studies on the violin at 3 years old through the Suzuki Method. I hope I said that right.
You
He
got it.
has he has toured out of South Florida and Atlanta, New Orleans, Los Angeles, Asheville, North Carolina, Austin, Texas, and he has shared the stage with the likes of Steven Taylor, Aerosmith, Jason Newsted of Metallica and Chophouse Band, and a number of others. Carl is the most highly sought after violinist in South Florida for weddings, engagements, parties, events, and he can play every style imaginable, appealing to a variety of clients from every demographic. And before we get into our episode for today, I just want to thank our sponsors, Florida Balance Centers, where we help all those suffering with vertigo, dizziness, balance, and pain management conditions. I've had vertigo, so I know and I can understand the struggle and the crazy. So stop suffering and call us today at 954-987-7077. And a quick reminder, per request for a donation link, it's inside the description below, so please support our work. Now let's get into the episode, EQ to the rescue. So Carl, wow, I am so impressed.
I tell you, it's good to see you, Esther. So it's always a little bit weird for me to hear, either a bio or nice stuff about me. Maybe that's a good place to start. It's still a little bit uncomfortable when I hear this nice stuff about me, because for a long time, there was a number of major struggles in my life, pretty much from when the time I was a kid. And still accepting compliments and listening to nice things about me is so a little bit foreign. So we can get into that for sure. Thank you so much for having me, Esther. It's great to see you, and I love being here with you.
Of course. So, Carl, can we share how we know each other? Would that be
Sure.
okay?
Yeah.
So Carl and I know each other because we are a part of TAO, which is Temple Adopt Or, and it's a beautiful spiritual community where we study all kinds of Jewish faith information. It's a Jewish community, and it's a beautiful, warm, soulful community. Rabbi Mark Labowitz and his family, and it's just such a beautiful place. And we know each other because we both were in the orchestra. Carl is still in the orchestra, and I have stepped down. I was with the orchestra for about 8 years, and no, sorry, 13 years. Sorry, 13 years. And I stepped down around COVID time. I'm sure a lot of people had a lot of transformations around COVID time, right? So I had some transformations, and one of those was finding my life partner, my life and business partner, Tom. And so it was time for me to kind of revamp my life a little bit. But I still show up for the high holidays. And that's how I met Carl, is that we shared the stage together. And Carl is an amazing violinist. And I remember just recently, this is how this conversation, the seed level of this conversation was that I said to Carl, listening to you play on the violin is like listening to God. And because your music is just so beautiful.
Thank you.
And I know that, I know that it's so hard getting compliments. I get that. I totally get what you're saying because we're looking from the internal, right? So we're not looking, we don't see what people see. We see what we see.
Which is a pattern of our own experience, and so we see through life through our own lenses, which are often polarized with trauma, with polarized with doubts, uncertainties, fears. It's an accumulation of life, man. And we accumulate some good stuff, and then maybe we accumulate some stuff that's maybe not so good. But boy, this stuff plays itself out over and over in these repeated patterns in our lives. And music can be, music is a great way to break patterns. It's also an incredibly healing mechanism. You mentioned the concept of like, I hear a higher power when I hear you play. And, if you think about it, every religious service in the world utilizes music as the biggest component of the service. And why is that? Well, it's because music naturally draws us close to a power greater than ourselves, and can be such a great illustrator of every emotion. So
Yeah.
really, if there's an adjective can be played musically. We can play happy music, sad music, depressing music, uplifting music, spiritual music, unspiritual music. So many different possibilities within the realm of music.
Yeah. And I know for me that whenever I sing, it just takes me to a whole new level of consciousness. Like I remember when I would come to rehearsals and I would just start singing and I could be stressed out to the max. And the minute I sat down and those notes came out of me, it was like I was transformed to something else. And so that's why I wanted to do this conversation about how music, instruments, and specifically in your situation, the violin, can be such a powerful tool to help us with our emotions and our mental health. So let's get into it a little bit more about, tell us how you started on your journey with the violin.
So violin journey started young. At 3 years old, I have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity, since a kid. And boy, it was really bad when I was a young kid. So my mom thought perhaps putting a violin in my hand would slow me down. It did actually, but she got a Cracker Jack box with a ruler taped to it. And that's how I learned how to hold the violin, was on a little Cracker Jack box. And I started when I was about 3.5. And by the time I guess I was 7 or 8, it was apparent that it was taking. It was, I was enjoying it. I was pretty good at it. And so I began to study in New York City pretty young. My mom and dad made great sacrifices for me to be able to have a really great musical upbringing. My mom would spend her weekends driving me into Manhattan to lessons and to Carnegie Hall for rehearsals. I made my Carnegie Hall debut at 13. I should tell you now, traditionally in the classical music world, it's not really known for a rock and roll lifestyle, right? The classical music world is very demure. It's very by the book, right? It's not this rock and roll lifestyle. But I was a rock and roll kid trapped in a classical music violinist body, right? So people couldn't figure me out. Before my Carnegie Hall debut, I went across the street to Ray's Pizza, drank 6 Bud Lights, caught a little bit of a buzz, and went to my first Carnegie Hall show with a tipsy. My family was in from all over the world, and it should have been a sign as to what's to come. But alongside music, so there was Carl, the incredibly talented young violinist, and then there was also Carl, who was given up at birth for adoption. There was Carl, who had religious trauma, physical, emotional abuse, a really bad experience with a Catholic priest. And so, on one hand, I was this very talented musician. And on this other hand, I had a perfect storm of trauma brewing in my life when I was a kid that made, for me, drugs very appealing. And so I think I tried my first drink and drug at, right around 12. And by the time I was 17, it was pretty much a daily thing. I did make it up to college for a couple of years on a full scholarship. My grade point average was 0.8. That's 0.8, because I never went to class. I'd rather go to the bar. And so this started a relationship with drugs and alcohol that lasted a whole lot of years. And I'm going to do the Reader's Digest version because we don't have that much time. I went to my first treatment center in the year 2000, 1999, actually. I was in treatment over New Year's Eve 2000. That was my first experience. And after that, for the next 17 years, I went in and out of recovery 20 times. I went to 20 different rehabs, could not get it together. And in 2017, I sort of had my awakening where I went to detox and I said, man, I've got to try something completely different because this, whatever I'm doing is not working. I keep screwing up, you know? And so somebody suggested, you know, why don't you play some free music for somebody for Christmas? It was over the holidays. So I put a Facebook post up and I said, who wants some free music for Christmas? And I get this this message back from a special needs teacher in a tiny town outside Houston, Texas called Smithville. And she said, you know, I've got 10 special needs kids that can't afford Christmas and nobody's ever brought live music into them. So I was like, well, this is perfect. You know, I'm going to get a couple of my friends. We'll go play some music for these kids. I had some of my friends send some Amazon gifts to them, and we loaded up the van and went out for what I thought was just going to be another afternoon of music with some kids. And boy, did that day change my life. So I met a little girl named Lily, 7-year-old kid with cerebral palsy. And this kid limped over to me and gave me this hug. And I still can't tell the story without getting emotional about it. She gave me this hug, and this hug did more for me than 20 trips to rehab. It did more for me than the $400,000 my parents spent to try to get me better. It did more for me than therapy. It did more for me than anything. And I just was blown away because this innocent hug from this kid with a disability was just like everything that I needed to set on the course of getting better. And so I got through that day and I was like, that was the best day musically I have ever had. You know, the way that these kids responded to the music, the fact that somebody had taken time out of their lives to go bring just a simple gift of music to these kids meant so much, so much. And I left that day changed. You know, I think one of the things that happened was that, you know, I had a lot of icicles around my heart from drug addiction, and drug addiction hardens people, you know, and this kid found a way to melt the icicles around my heart. And so I thought to myself, well, that was great. Why don't I do it again? And that was the start of the nonprofit that I have today, the Grace Notes Project. We are part of the programming. It's amazing. So we're part of the programming for Godsmack. The band Godsmack has a charity. It's called the Scars Foundation. We're now part of the Scars Foundation. And, you know, some of my work is getting to bring free music to kids with special needs. And, you know, that's a big change from, you know, this touring rock and roll lifestyle that I had from, you know, 1995 to 2015. The two lives are almost not even the same. I'm playing music in both of them, but music has become totally different in the second part of my life. So I hope that's a really winding answer to that question, but I hope it made sense, right?
Well, we know that in life, nothing is a straight line, so it's perfect.
It's true.
You know, I'm curious to know, and if you know, if you feel comfortable to share,
Sure.
because it could really help someone out there who is struggling with drug addiction or alcohol addiction or any addiction, really. You know, what do you think was the cause of the direction of the drugs, the alcohol? Was it the situation with the priest? What trauma really triggered it?
Well, I think that addiction is 100% a trauma-born illness. It always originates from either something you needed when you were a kid that you didn't get, or something that you didn't need when you were a kid that you did get, you know, i.e. violence, i.e. neglect, right? And so I work in treatment, and I have for 10 years now almost. And working in treatment, you get to see a lot of people come in and share their backgrounds and their stories. And I can tell you that 100% of the people that come to us for treatment have trauma. It's a trauma-born illness, pure and simple. I think there is truth to the fact that it could be hereditary as well. But I think the bigger exacerbator of any addiction is going to be trauma. And until you clear out the trauma, you just can't stay in recovery. I tried to stay in recovery without clearing that stuff out, and it just never worked for me. And it was, you know, one feeble attempt after another feeble attempt after another feeble attempt.
Yeah, you know, I agree with you. You know, there is a book written by Dr. Gabriel Mate.
Gabor
It's
Mate.
called
Gabor Mate.
Yes, I probably say it wrong. It's
In the
called
Realm
The
of
Myth
Hungry
of
Ghosts.
Normal. What?
I said the first one, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, was his first book, but you're talking about his second.
Yes, The Myth of Normal. And it's a really powerful book. And it really talks about, it also talks about ADHD, actually, which he discussed as a trauma-based condition
Yep.
as well. And I really agree with that. I think a lot of us have these ADHD, ADD, whatever. I do believe it is a trauma-based condition. And, you know, there's a whole other thing that I think about that in terms of medication and why it's being diagnosed and all these things, but we could talk about that another time. But just to say that, yeah, trauma is a huge thing. And so let's continue to talk about, so do you think that you chose the violin? Obviously, your mom chose it for you then, right?
Yeah, you know, and yes, my mom chose it for me, but I think the violin chose me, to be honest with you. You know, I think that I have this crazy belief that before we enter these bodies that we have on earth, these suits, that we know what we're signing up for. I think that we, you know, we pick our earthly journey before we know it's going to be, you know, so we sign up for what we're going to go through, I think, before this whole thing starts, man. And, you know, I'm pretty sure that I was destined to become a musician. From what I've heard, my biological father was a musician. I don't know who he is, but I've heard that he was a musician. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I share that same belief with you. And I think that the other thing that I recently found, though, is because it's interesting, your mom wasn't a musician though, right?
Right.
Okay.
Not a lick of musical talent.
Okay. It's interesting. I saw something on a show recently. I think it was on Steve Harvey. There was a little kid who was like 2 years old, or no, sorry, he's like 2 or 3 or 4, something like that, between the ages of, you know, 2 and 5 somewhere. And he's a martial arts expert. And when they asked him, what they were asking the parents, how did this happen? Did he, you know, was he born with these gifts? Like, what happened? Basically, the dad is like some sort of champion. You know, they have like some sort of school or academy or whatever. And the mom is also was a martial arts expert as well. And so when they carried the baby, when she was carrying the baby, she was working and competing and doing a bunch of stuff. So it's fascinating because it kind of dawned on me that, yeah, in that sense, genetics makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of places where, for me, we've had proof that genetics does not work. And let's talk about that just for a second, which is in nutrition and things like that, and certain diseases. There's a lot of controversy around, you know, genetics versus free will in your choices. There is such a thing called epigenetics, which discuss that it is our own choices. Genetics plays a very small part in that. So we can't blame genetics on all these diseases that we're dealing with. So let's, you know, we'll leave it at that for now. But it really kind of confirmed for me the theory that, you know what you are because of your genetics. So it could be that your dad, I would be curious to know if your dad did play, you know, I guess your mom knew, right, that he was a musician, and he was very, what instrument did he play?
No idea. No idea, because I don't know who my birth parents are. I mean, I've heard
Oh,
from, you know, it was a close adoption, so I don't really know much about them. I know that they were 14 and 15. I know my name at birth was Sean McMahon, and I know my dad was a musician. That's about it, you know.
okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. That kind of
No, it's fine.
slipped for a second. I got you. Okay, now it makes sense. Okay. So your adopted mother got you the violin.
Correct.
Got you. Okay, very good. Yes, and you know, I love what you're saying, because the adopted parent, I feel, based on our belief system, was also a soul that probably knew what she was getting into. So she knew that she needs to get you an instrument, and here we go. So that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So, so do you feel that, playing an instrument or violin specifically has had a positive effect on your emotional health, and why?
Of
Mental
course.
and emotional health.
Yeah, so a lot of what I do in treatment is study how music affects mood. And so for myself, when I'm playing music, practicing music, there's definitely a reduction in anxiety and a lifting of depression. It's just part of the deal. You can be having a really horribly difficult day, pick up your instrument, and something connects, and it's just like it brings you back into the moment. It's like doing breath work or yoga. It's impossible to be focused on tomorrow's problems or yesterday's bullshit when you're playing an instrument, because you're focused right in the moment. And if we stay in the moment, there's never really a problem in the moment. It's the fear of the future and the regret of the past. And so that's part of it. So a lot of what I do in groups is I chart how clients can be taken, down anxiety, down depression, and post-acute withdrawal, cravings, anything like that. So if I do a 1 hour music session with them, they should expect their anxiety and depression and cravings to go down by 4 to 5 points on a 1 to 10 scale, which Xanax can't get you down 4 or 5 points on a 1 to 10 scale. So, what we're talking about with music is the ability to do more than a prescription medicine in the way of reducing anxiety, reducing depression, feeling more centered in the moment. Music can be a catalyst for change. I mean, there's so many good things about it, aside from it just being music and incredibly pleasing to play,
Well, I looked up some benefits, of playing the violin and playing music. So it said, music can activate the brain's reward system, releasing chemicals like dopamine and serotonin that can improve mood, reduce stress, and upbeat music can make you feel joy, calm, can make you feel relaxed, mind, body, and spirit.
Yes.
So yeah, right. I mean,
100%.
like how many of us, how many us can, I don't know why I can't talk today. How many of us can think about when we are just hanging out and then all of a sudden a song comes on and it can awaken an emotion, right? Either a sad emotion that triggers maybe a memory, or a happy song that totally uplifts us,
Look, I've seen, so I do a lot of work in memory care as well. So I will go and I will play for an Alzheimer's patient who cannot remember their name at breakfast. And I can play something like, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, for example, is a good example, because that's a song that brings elderly people right back into the 1970s when that movie came out, right? They can hear this one song and it's like, it brings them right back into today, and it brings them right back into their body, where an hour ago they couldn't remember anything about their life, but that one song brings them right back into it. It's really powerful stuff. Really powerful stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. This might be a great time for you to play. Can you,
Sure.
Do you want to play right now? Does that work for you?
Sure. Let's do Somewhere Over the Rainbow, shall we? I'm using my cheap pianist today, but that's okay. Here we go. Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
All right. Yeah,
All right.
it's hard to hear through the Zoom. So what
Yeah.
I'm gonna do is I had an idea is next time, or actually what we can do is your website has a lot of videos of
Yeah.
you playing. So if anybody wants to hear Carl play, because I was very choppy with the Zoom, you're welcome to go and listen on his website. You'll be amazed. You're very talented, Carl.
Thank you,
Um,
Esther.
question, as we were playing, I looked this up and it was a very interesting thing. There's a condition called violin hickey.
Yes, it's the violin hickey, the famous violin hickey, and it occurs. So as I put the violin up, this used to be the mark of if you practiced or not. Your teacher would know whether you're practiced. If you had a good violin hickey, it means you're up to par and doing 6 hours a day. So when you put the instrument under your chin, it rubs a lot. And so when you're doing a lot of up and down, this obviously rubs against the neck like so, and it can leave a pretty bright hickey right over here that looks like, just like what it's called, the hickey. So when I was in middle school, all the guys thought I was getting hickeys from girls, and I'd be like, guys, I'm playing the violin. They'd be like, sure, man, sure, sure, it's the violin, but really it's the violin hickey. And
That's
it's
pretty cool.
violinists. I mean, if you look at professional concert violinists, those are the guys that are practicing 10 hours a day. They almost have like a scar. It's almost like a raised bump there permanently from that violin hickey.
Is there a way to avoid that?
Not if you're practicing, there isn't. I mean, there's ways you can minimize it. I use a hypoallergenic chin rest. You can put a cloth under there. It helps, but I mean, really, there's no substitute for practice. And it's like, Esther, when people are like, Carl, you're so talented, I'm like, well, I think talent's a little bit of it, just like genetics is a little bit of it, but more than that, it's repetition and practice, right? Just like anything.
100%.
So
Yeah.
if you're practicing, you're going to have a violin hickey. It's just part of the deal. It's almost like a mark of being a successful violinist is having it, right?
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like what I say about level of crazy. When you practice your EQ muscles and you practice to recognize and manage those muscles, you will be able to handle stress better. You'll be able to have better relationships. You'll be able to, you'll want to slap somebody, but you don't. and so It's really about practice. So in
Yes,
everything that we do, we have to practice. So that's very powerful. Now,
yes.
how do you keep your neck from hurting and being injured?
Oh gosh. My neck, I mean, I do yoga a few days a week. I go to the gym. I take care of myself. Not as well as I should. My posture isn't as good as it should be. I'm 49 years old now, so I'm going to hit the big 5 next year. And I'm in pretty constant pain due to 2 herniated discs in my back and a stress fracture. So posture is important. I try to take as good care of myself as I can, considering what I've got going on. But at this age, the body doesn't do what it did when it was 20 years old. So there's a lot more pain than there used to be. That's for sure.
Yeah. So tell me about how did you like, or what was that like to perform with some of these really big names, Aerosmith and some of these other guys that that I mentioned in your bio?
So to be quite honest with you, Esther, it was just another day for me. I It's hard, when I growing up, I got to meet a lot of heavy hitters in the classical world. So I guess I was introduced to maybe famous people early. So I don't get too starstruck around them. They're just normal people, that happen to have gotten famous from their skill. And I think that, they appreciate people that don't pester them like they're, when I went out to, we went out to lunch with Steven Tyler, and it was like he was getting dive bombed by people everywhere he went. And it's like, I wouldn't want to be that famous at all, man. It was like a turnoff. It's like, guy can't even enjoy lunch by himself without people. You're Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. And, to be honest with you, and I mean this, man, I would rather come and do my groups at Recovery Unplugged where I work, or I would rather do my nonprofit Grace Notes than play with any of those rock stars. And for a couple reasons, I believe it's what I'm on this earth to do, number one. And number two, man, that whole allure of the rock and roll world has vanquished for me. Like, I don't, I used to think it was really attractive to be a rock and roll guy in a tour bus. And then after I lived that life, I realized there's no stability in it. There's no, you're on the road constantly. You don't have any normalcy in your life. You eat like shit because you can't, cook your own food. So you're on, you're eating Waffle House 5 days a week. I mean, it's not a healthy lifestyle. So I'd rather do what I'm doing now. It was a great experience, and it was great for my resume, but that's what I'll say about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's exactly what the world is right now. And that, kind of leads us into the next question of, how do you recognize and manage your level of crazy? And that's part of the question about, I want to know it from you, but I would love to know how they do also. Because it does seem like a very stressful life. It's never as glamorous as it's made out to be, because
No,
it's such a lie.
such a
And
lot.
it's all just to, it's just to like make money, make sales, sell those tickets. But at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
these are humans that you're talking about, and they go to the, excuse me to be rude and and crude, but everybody takes a piss the same way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So everybody's a human, right?
Yeah.
So tell me how you recognize your level of crazy, and especially when you're around that lifestyle.
So I think we learn to recognize. I've learned that I have an emotional barometer, right? When my barometer's off, I know it's off. I mean, I'm the first one to know it's off. My serenity's gone. I'm, restless, irritable, discontent. I don't like being around people. So I know it immediately. So what do I do to work on it? Well, I mean, meditation is a part of it. Yoga is a part of it. Being outdoors and doing things like going to the beach 3 days a week is part of it. Being around nature, not sitting on my cell phone for 13 hours a day, detaching from social media, not watching politics on MSNBC like I used to, because I just realized it was an attempt. It's I have no control over what goes on in this country, man. And the quicker I come to terms with that and grips to that, the more serenity I have in my life. Boy, I tell you, man, like, we are living in some pretty effed up times right now. And this election coming up in November is a source of great stress for a lot of us, for myself included. And I'll give you a perfect example, man. Last night I watched that debate and cringed. I mean, it was awful. It was terrible that these are the two best people we have in this country to run this. And it's scary. And it's like, it triggered me. So what do? Well, I got to bed early. I didn't watch the whole debate. I shut it off. And then I said, enough of this nonsense. I woke up this morning, I did my little morning meditation and I went to work, and I feel better. I didn't keep engaged in the crazy, There was a time when that was attractive, that whole crazy thing I'd have been right in the middle of it. But these days, man, like I get that, I call it that not so fresh feeling, that not so fresh feeling, stuff's going askew. And then it's like, I either can get back on track right away, or I can ride that out to the bitter end and ruin my day, my week, or even my month sometimes if I let it,
Yep. Well, let me tell you a couple things about what you just said, because I'd like to dig deeper into that for a minute. Is that I love what you said about nature and, limiting social media and, meditation, all great tools, amazing. And then also it sounds like you're very self-aware. So, that's a very good skill to have. I have an assessment actually on my website that people can take a little assessment and learn about themselves. And you would probably rate very high on self-awareness. And then you could gauge to see where you are on self-management. I know for me, I'm the same way. I'm very in tune with myself. I'm very intuitive in terms of general, like I can tap into stuff that some people just, they don't see what's coming. I could be seeing what's coming 30 years from now. It's really annoying sometimes. but it does definitely help me manage my life and steer me in the right direction. But I'm not so special. Everyone can tap into this. And but my area of improvement is in self-regulation, is learning how to not react, more like respond, to be able to, like I said earlier, you want to punch somebody but you don't, that type of thing. And so it's very powerful. So all those tools that you said, and nutrition, which I'm sure because you mentioned it earlier, all those tools are so powerful. So, amazing. The one thing I do want to tell you is that we do have other options. Actually, we have RFK Jr., which is running, and he is amazing. And I don't know if you've been learning about him or if you've heard about him. They do have, and I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm just saying that there is another option and everyone should go check it out. They did do a real debate. He put on a real debate, and that's on YouTube, so you can look it up, where he hears them talking, and then he's actually on a stage and he gives his input after the two of them have given their information, and then
I won't even call the other two's input, because it wasn't even input. It was such a disaster. I mean, it was like watching a train wreck in slow motion for 90 minutes. I'm not adverse to RFK, and I'm not adverse to, but look, like, we don't yet live in a three-party country. We live in a two-party country, and if they don't, my feeling on this, and this is totally off topic, but if we don't get Biden off the ticket, we're going to lose to Trump. And if we get 4 more years of Trump, we're done. We're going to be living in the handmaid's tale. I tell you, like, I will sacrifice my emotional stability to fight for this, because I think it's so important, like, that we do not let this guy back into, like, Donald Trump shouldn't be the dog catcher of a town, much less the president of the United States of America after what he's pulled. Nonetheless, I don't have to be a participant in this 24/7, and I can pick and choose the times when I engage in it, and then I have the tools to disengage, so I don't stay stuck in that place of, like, being just overwhelmed with worry or anger or whatever else. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think, and I don't want to go down the road of politics, so we'll just leave it at that. I will say that we have to be open to new possibilities, right? In order to create new results, we have to take new actions. And so I will say that I think everyone should at least get informed and listen and educate yourselves and learn what's out there, so that you can make a good decision for yourself, right? And for the world. So as we wrap this up, I want to.
Yeah, I was about to say, I just got the 10-minute heads up from my group.
Yes. Okay, good. So any final thoughts about, if somebody wants to take up a violin or instrument, what a couple things here, like, one, what would be something that they should be warned about, maybe, right? What are the cons and what are the pros? Let's just keep it like that.
Yeah,
What are the
so it's
cons and the pros?
I can answer this very, very easily because every prospective violin student asks me this question and I tell it to them just like it is. If you don't have a year to devote to sounding like shit, don't start the violin. That's number one. Number two, if you don't have 30 minutes to an hour a day in your schedule to devote 5 days a week at the very minimum, 7 days a week to get really good results, don't start the violin. If slow progress frustrates you, don't start the violin. If you like a great challenge, the violin may be appropriate for you. If you don't mind slow progress, the violin might be right for you. If you're looking for an exercise in patience, the violin might be for you. But it is not a quick instrument. It's the hardest instrument to learn of all of them. I'm lucky because I started when I was 3, so the muscle memory at this point, it's just second nature. It's like a third arm. I suggest that if you're under 30, violin can be a really good instrument to start if you've got the time for it. Above 30, I would recommend a guitar, a piano, or a mandolin or ukulele because they're fretted instruments and they're 100 times easier to play. Without frets on the instrument, the violin is incredibly precise, where a quarter of an inch can be severely out of tune. And so without knowing muscle memory and music theory and stuff like this, the violin can become a very difficult thing. And honestly, if I had to take a guess, I would say 80 to 90% of people that start the violin quit within a year. 80 to 90% because it's very difficult.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know if you know, I think I told you, I actually played the viola when I was a kid. So
Good.
I tried it. I don't think it was for me. I think I was meant for EQ.
There you go.
And so,
You're doing a bang up
yes,
job.
and yes, and so here we are today. So awesome. Thank you so much, Carl, for your
Oh, you
time.
kidding?
And any last thoughts about, violin playing and EQ?
I tell you, the key to a successful life is to think of yourself less and to help others more. And I'll wrap it up, whether it's EQ or music or whatever else. I think we are our best when we are giving and in service to others that don't have as much as us, and that keeps me in a place of gratitude and wholeness, and it's done wonders for my life, and wouldn't have it any other way. That's how I stay sober.
Perfectly said. So now let's finish up with my famous quote. You're welcome to join me if you know what it is, Carl. Otherwise, just hang on tight for the ride. Ready? Here we go. So thank you everyone for being here. Until our next episode, when you know and understand yourself, the world will know and understand you too. And remember, what's the best that can happen? Now let's get crazy. Okay, Carl, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Esther. Wonderful to see you, and thank you so much for letting me be a part of it. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.